The Best of Our Knowledge explores topics on learning, education, and research. Coming up, we'll learn about how one artist views and creates visual art through the use of artificial intelligence, and we'll discuss the importance of AI literacy. And American cities are shrinking. We'll learn how satellites are being used to track shifting population centers. I'm Lucas Willard, host of The Best of Our Knowledge. You're listening to The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. An unusual interactive art exhibit at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York this summer explores visual art through a lens of artificial intelligence. David Rokeby is the artist behind Surfing the Manifold: Adventures in Latent Space. He says the work rests on the shoulders of many, and he doesn't view the AI-generated work as art in its truest form, but sees his role as an artist as a facilitator for the model, which uses tech and works created in the past. WAMC's Samantha Simmons spoke with Rokeby to discuss his work and the importance of AI literacy.
While I was in art school back in the 80s, early 80s, I was tinkering around with computers and trying to figure out how to become an artist at the same time. And I realized that when I was working with a computer, it made me feel like unsure about the status of my body. My body is uncomfortable because I'm sitting in this desk in this hunched position or whatever. I was trying to forget I had a body. So the real starting point for my work was just trying to turn that upside down. Can I use computers to make a situation where I was experiencing, enjoying, and aware of my body more than I would normally be aware of, as opposed to less? And so that was really the start of my career, starting by creating something called Very Nervous System, which was an installation that translated body movement into music in real time. And that was a huge gateway, partly because it toured all over the world, but also because it was an incredible way to play with the tensions and connections between our embodied experience and the disembodied space of digital media. So that really was where things started. But in the early 90s, as I started to hear about people talking about artificial intelligent agents on the web and things like this, I started to wonder what it means to talk about things that aren't human as having intelligence. And I realized that I really wanted to get my fingers into this, and so I, in a sense, dressed up as an AI researcher in the 90s, back when AI didn't really work, and set about creating a system that would look at objects and talk about them. This is now very easy to do with AI. It was very difficult to do with AI. It was a 10-year project, but I ended up with an installation called The Giver of Names, where you enter a space in the museum and there's a pedestal and a bunch of objects on the floor, just household objects and toys and things. You could pick whatever you want up, put it on top of the pedestal. A camera would start analyzing, and a camera and computer would start looking, what's the outline, what colors are there, what's the arrangement of objects. It would stimulate this big database of hundreds of thousands of words and ideas, and then speak sentences aloud about the object or objects. It was sometimes literal, sometimes poetic and crazy, but always somehow connected to aspects of those objects. And that was an amazing experience to do that piece, because it was really a journey into thinking about perception and language, and maybe most poignantly realizing that when you try to program a behavior like this, that's something that we do as humans, like I see effortlessly. I speak and I read, it seems like nothing. But when you actually have to program those things, you realize how unbelievably complicated those actions are, and how much of what we do as humans we take for granted and don't see. So that became a whole other entree into explorations of all sorts of things that happen at the conjunction between computers and humans.
Right now, we're looking at your AI art. As we keep speaking, new images keep flashing across the screen. Can you describe what we're looking at?
Right. So first I'm going to qualify it by saying that I don't quite consider this an artwork because it rests on so many shoulders. First thing is it's using a model that was trained on millions of artworks of people in the past. It was built using technologies developed by all sorts of different people historically. And so I feel almost like more like a facilitator in this case. And I'm also, honestly, as an artist, really struggling with the question, what does it mean to make art now when systems can make things that kind of look pretty art-like almost effortlessly? So this is really a side glance at the question. What does it mean to think about images and language and things like that in this current moment? It rises out of the research we do in my lab in Toronto, which, as I said, is an AI research lab inside a theater department. So in a theater department, words, gestures, body, expression are all important. And especially body and real-time actions, creativity in that sort of very improvisational way are key. And so, for example, getting machine learning systems to be quick and responsive and intuitive in a way that can work in that context is one of the focuses of the lab. So this work comes out of an attempt to take something many people will be familiar with, image generation by AI, where you send a prompt and it sends you back an image, but to turn it into something different that's flowing, that's continuous, that works with your voice, you can perform with, but that you can also poke and prod and feel your way through in an intuitive way that's not possible by sending prompts off and getting images back a few seconds later. So this is generating images constantly in a panorama that's being generated by my voice as I speak. If I suddenly talk about bears, bears will appear very quickly. That bear appeared within a second of me saying bears. And now it's only gonna show bears if I keep talking about bears and bears and bears. Now I'll talk about teddy bears, little teddy bears being hugged by small children. Small children hugging teddy bears. There we go. So it's something you can talk with and talk to. And so it's really an attempt to get inside, to allow, in fact, people who know nothing about the technology to get inside and experience and explore the technology. And I think that's really important because right now we have a lot of technology being thrown at us, very little opportunity to really think and reflect on it. And I think it's absolutely critical that we as an entire civilization be involved in the conversation of what future we're walking into. And so to be able to get in a more intuitive way an understanding of what's going on with AI systems is, I think, critical as a sort of public literacy act. And so this piece I see as much that as something towards an artwork.
What format do you expect people to interact with this in?
So when people are interacting with this, in general, so far it's been presented as an installation where there's a microphone in front of the projection and you just are invited to talk. And that works way better than I imagined. People are a little hesitant at first because we're not used to speaking images. And so there's a lot of, I don't know what to say. But people eventually really get into that, and that works well. We have explored using it in performance as well. And one of the exciting possibilities, especially, this is a double wide image, but we can make a much wider image. We can wrap a stage in this image. And then we can put a performer in motion capture suit and figure out where they're pointing and have them only affecting the parts of the image they're pointing to, so they can build a visual world around them on the fly as they're telling a story, for example. So that's a different kind of usage, a very intentional use for performance.
Are you at all worried about the emissions output of AI? That's something, I hear people talk about, is that AI is bad for the environment.
Absolutely worried about that, but it's important to contextualize it a bit. Part of the problem, most of the things we run in the lab are running either on my Mac laptop or on a workstation like this, which is, yes, it uses power, but we're talking about a few 100-watt bulbs. It's less than your fridge or So you can run models in useful and interesting ways in energy conscious manner. The problem is that the dominant theories in AI right now are all about scale. Bigger models, more training, these huge data farms that are doing stuff. Training the models does take a lot of energy and a lot of water. That's definitely a concern. And the pure belief that scale is the most important thing here leads inexorably to more and more energy use, and that seems really problematic. We don't even know how useful these things will actually be in practical ways, and we're already talking about throwing trillions of dollars into energy systems to power them. That seems like that's the cart so far before the horse that it's a little bit crazy. But the current economic environment, where it's seen as a key to efficiency and therefore a solution to all sorts of issues, means and also a way to make lots of money for the companies that get ahead in it. It means that there's not a lot of space for really thinking philosophically, sociologically, socially, psychologically, politically about what the impacts of these systems are. There are people doing that thinking. Their voices are a little bit crushed under the wave of either hype or doom. These systems are going to be around us. I think we need to be already asking really important questions about what kind of future we would want from them. So we can start to say, actually, this is what you want to hand us as a technology. This is what we want. Make what we want. And we need an informed public to make that, to be able to make that a public discussion that actually causes change.
You've spent a long time working in the AI world. How do you think that has shaped you as an artist? There's talk all the time that AI is going to take jobs away from people. Do you feel that way?
There is no question that AI is going to take jobs away from people. There is a credible argument that new jobs will be created in the process, but I think it's facile to say, oh, don't worry about it. We've seen through all the phases of automation that what happens is the kinds of jobs change. Sometimes the quality or sense of fulfillment from those jobs changes, and those things are really important and probably really operational in our current political environment, where people are very frustrated about loss of certain kinds of jobs that they may have valued in the past or given a sense of value. The loss of those seems to be creating some of the anger. It's a hard. I have so many ways to answer this question, so that's what I'm trying to figure out in here. As an artist, as I told you, I do find myself questioning what I've always been doing. That this raises questions about that, and so in a sense, I feel like it took my job away, but it gave me a new job. So that's positive. I do think the bigger problem is that there are strong motivations to use the technology to actually intentionally take jobs away. Not necessarily just that it will replace people, but that people see, oh, well, if we can fire a bunch of people because this will do the job, we can save money and make more money for our shareholders, for our billionaire owners or whatever. That's certainly problematic. What happens if we were able, spit pie in the sky, if we were able to disconnect the development of AI from that pure push towards money making? Then I think there are lots of really interesting possibilities for where AI can be positioned socially that don't just take jobs away. But I do think in the current economic, political environment, there is a serious danger that it will be considered advantageous to replace people with AI, even where it doesn't do the same job that the people are doing. It may seem to do that job. And so I'm more concerned with us losing sight of the specific value of human workers.
David Rokeby is director of the University of Toronto's BMO Laboratory for Creative Research in the Arts, Performance, Emerging Technologies, and AI. He spoke with WAMC's Samantha Simmons. This is The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. If you live in a major city in the U.S., you are sinking. Across America's 28 largest cities, the ground is literally shifting. A new study using millimeter precision satellite data determined that cities are sinking up to 2 inches per year. The Best of Our Knowledge's Madeline Reynolds spoke with Leonard Owenhen, a postdoc at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory at Columbia University, to learn more.
In this study, we use satellite measurement. And the way it works is a satellite flies over an area and it tracks motion of the ground at a certain time, or it sends out pulse signals that bounces off the surface of the ground and goes back to the satellite. And if it flies over the same area a second time, it takes the same measurement, and we can take the difference between those two different acquisitions and get a sense of motion of the land surface or how much the land is changing over time. So for this study specifically, we use Sentinel-1 satellite, which is a European-based satellite, so from the European Space Agency. And we use that to measure what the average rate of sinking from 2015 to 2021 is for all of these 28 cities.
So I am curious, what are the man-made reasons, or maybe what we cause to more rapidly happen, as to why cities are sinking? I mean, thinking about Houston, for example, being the most rapid.
Yes, good question. I should start by saying subsidence can often be a natural process, specifically coastal subsidence, and that has to do with the geology or the material that the land is on. In most cases, in most coastal regions, the land is underlain by what we refer to as young, unconsolidated sediments. And such sediments compact slowly over time due to added weight on the surface, which we refer to as overburden sediment. And so what happens over time slowly is that you see these natural changes on the land surface that causes the land to sink, particularly in coastal area. But extraction of groundwater or oil and gas from the ground can cause such rates to increase or even accelerate the rate of the natural subsidence that often coastal areas undergo. And so it could be due to groundwater extraction or oil and gas extraction. So all of this extraction activity can accelerate the rate or even create new frontiers of areas that are not sinking to become rapid areas of subsidence.
And I'm glad you touched upon, it being a natural occurrence, because my next question was actually, what are those natural reasons and things that cause cities to sink as well?
Yeah, the natural compaction of sediment, like I mentioned, due to the type of material, is one of them. In the US East Coast, which is also the case in most other parts of the world, you have a process known as GIA, or glacial isostatic adjustment, which is the response of the land to previous loading from ice sheet. So a really long time ago, during the last glacial maximum, a large part of the northern hemisphere was covered by large ice sheets, and that caused the land directly on the lane by that ice sheet to go down or subside. And the areas adjacent to that large ice sheet, which the US East Coast is part of that, went up during that last glacial maximum. But when the ice started to retreat about 21,000 years ago or 18,000 years ago, so the areas where that went down or subsided due to that large load started to go up. And the areas that were experiencing uplift or that went up due to that large ice sheet started to experience subsidence, which is what we're still experiencing today. So that delayed reaction due to that removal of that load causes some part of the land to sink. And so glacial isostatic adjustment, or GIA, is one, and the other is the natural processes. But you also have processes due to tectonic activities. So on the Pacific end coast, for example, so cities like San Francisco, you have areas where the land moves, there's relative motion, either uplift or subsidence due to fault motion or movement of different plates underneath the other.
So, with city sinking, how vulnerable is city infrastructure? And is the city infrastructure contributing to the cities actually sinking as well?
Yes, the weight of a city can contribute to what causes the city to sink. Remember, we talked about this natural process of compaction that occurs in in some areas. And so in the city, the weight above the city, depending on what material it is being laid on, can actually contribute to that subsidence because you're adding more overburden weight, so to speak, to that city, which causes that easily young compressible sediment to become more compressible, and that accelerates sinking. But in other places, it may not be that much of a contribution, or it may even have a negligible effect that is not easy to track. So I want to be clear that it's not like every major city is sinking just due to the weight of the sinking. It depends on a variety of factors, which is the geology, whether it's young compressible sediment, and also how those buildings are rooted, if they have their foundations down to the basement or they are just on top of the soil, for example, would be another contributing factor. But yes, subsidence does have contributes to vulnerability of infrastructure in major cities. And this can be in two ways. One is whether it's a coastal city or not, almost every city in the US faces periodic flooding. And what subsidence does is that you're creating a bowl that can cause water to collect in a single part of the city, which can exacerbate flooding in a city. Or it could change drainage pattern within a city, which can also contribute to flooding. And so you're essentially harming infrastructure in those cities that are exposed to flooding. The second way is directly from subsidence itself. And so just the sentiment of the city or the infrastructure can contribute to the vulnerability of an infrastructure or compromise the infrastructure over time slowly. But more critically is what happens when different parts of an infrastructure is sinking differentially. So we refer to this as differential settlement. And so if you have a building or a road or any infrastructure or a railway where one part is sinking and another part is rising, or they're sinking differentially, you then get this tilting motion across a building or an infrastructure, and that can cause fractures to slowly propagate over a building that can compromise its integrity slowly over time.
In the research article, it discusses differential motion, which I think you were just touching upon. Could you just
Yeah.
explain that a little bit more? Tell us what it is and the effects and examples of that as well.
Yes. So differential motion deals with differential sinking or differential settlement or differential rising across an infrastructure. And what that means is you have a single infrastructure, and instead of sinking uniformly for different sides of a building, for example, they start sinking at different rates. So the left side of a building is sinking at, say, 5 millimeter per year, and the right side is sinking at 1 millimeter per year. Remember, when we started, I mentioned that we do not have a single rate of motion across every city. And so you can have a single building, in this case, not just a city, but a single building or a single infrastructure, even a road or a railway, or different parts of that within a small part of a land sinking differently. So that is essentially what differential motion deals with. Sometimes it could even be one part is sinking and one part is rising. And so you're having this tilting motion that occurs along a building. And so, like I mentioned earlier, what that does is causing fractures to propagate across an infrastructure, which can be a potential hazard. So you start having some cracking of the building, or you start having tilting along the building. I know when I visited New Orleans, which is a really good example where you see this, you could roll a pebble from one part of the house to another side because you see that differential motion occurring across the building where the building is no longer settling at a single rate, but it's level, and that can compromise an infrastructure slowly over time. Or it could even be subtly along your pavement or your walkways where you have different parts that are settling differently. So one edge comes up higher than the other, or even a road as you try driving along the road, you start seeing this warping of a road where you go down and down and up across the road. And so that have such subtle effect that can slowly compromise infrastructure over time.
Is there any solutions to this? Is there any way to reverse it or possibly prevent it from getting worse as time goes on? Is there anything we can do?
Yes, they're a good example of that. a number of examples actually from all over the world, including the US. And so I love the example of Tokyo because it's a really good example of how human intervention or human policies can both contribute to subsidence and also change the course of subsidence. And so in the early 1900s, Tokyo in Japan was sinking really, really fast. So not even the rates that we measured in this study for US cities. So rates of centimeters and centimeters per year of sinking. And so in a decade, for example, you could have a meter of drop in some part of the city in Tokyo back then. And all of that was due to groundwater extraction activities ongoing in the city. And what happened was in the 1960s or 1970, they enacted policies about groundwater use and how much water would be extracted. And that slowly changed the course where some part of the city is not even stable, but it's actually now rising. So you have uplift. And that goes into first, you have to determine how much is the city sinking and if it is possible to respond to those changes. And that has to do with what the driver is of the sinking. So if the cause is groundwater extraction, so such policies as what was done in Tokyo, for example, can reverse the cause or even hot subsidence. But in other cases, it may be impossible to enact such policies because the processes are natural processes. So GIE, like I mentioned before, is a natural process that would keep going over time in the next few centuries because it's a natural process and it's a long-term process that is not easy to reverse within our lifetime. And so in such cases, you then have to adapt to such changes. So you can create policies that are targeted at infrastructure stability. So new building codes, for example, or new infrastructure changes, things that can help modulate subsidence so that you don't have such high rates of sinking would be one thing to do. And so you can also adapt to some of these changes that subsidence contributes to. So flooding, like I mentioned, is something that we can adapt to. You may not be able to stop the flooding, particularly when it's not just as a result of sea level rise. If for an inland city where a city periodically experiences flooding because of high precipitation or when it rains, then you have to adapt to such changes.
Leonard Owenhen's latest research into sinking cities was originally published in the journal Nature Cities. He spoke with the best of our knowledge's Madeline Reynolds. This has been The Best of Our Knowledge, episode 1819. The Best of Our Knowledge is a national production of WAMC, Northeast Public Radio. Thanks to associate producer Madeline Reynolds. The latest on all National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter and our flagship station's website, WAMC.org. Until next time, I'm Lucas Willard.